A patrol car locked its brakes hard enough to fishtail on the cobblestones, and a hand dropped onto a holstered weapon before a single word had been spoken. The woman standing on her own driveway did not flinch. That, more than anything else, was what would ruin the man behind the wheel. The afternoon sun sat heavy over Providence Ridge, an enclave tucked into the hills outside Charlotte, North Carolina, where hedges were trimmed with the precision of surgery, and the silence itself seemed to cost money. Simone Whitfield did not belong to old money, and had never pretended to. She was 43 years old, the founder and CEO of Vantage Shield Cyber Defense, a company she had built from a card table in a rented duplex into a firm that now protected the digital infrastructure of 3 state governments and 11 Fortune 500 companies. 4 years earlier, she had paid $10.4 million in cash for Ridgemont Manor, a stone Georgian estate at 1401 Ridgemont Lane, distinguished by a brass lion door knocker. Her late mother had once admired through a magazine page taped to a refrigerator in a 2-bedroom apartment in Gastonia. Corinne Whitfield had cleaned houses just like this one for 31 years. She had never lived to see her daughter buy one. It was 4:12 in the afternoon on a Thursday when Simone stepped outside in a faded Duke sweatshirt, gray joggers and sneakers with the tread worn smooth on one side. She was not dressed for anyone. She was dressed for a Thursday. Her 9-year-old daughter, Maya, was inside finishing a math worksheet at the kitchen island, and Simone had stepped out only to check the mailbox for a courier envelope containing the final signature pages of a $214 million contract with the state of North Carolina. A contract that, unbeknownst to the man about to pull into her driveway, had already been quietly approved that morning by the governor of the state, who was at that very moment sitting in Simone's own living room reviewing the appendix. Simone had built Vantage Shield out of nothing that anyone with real money would have recognized as a foundation. At 26, working from 2 folding tables pushed together in a rented duplex on Beaumont Street. She had taught herself penetration testing from library books because she could not afford the certification courses her competitors took for granted. Her mother, Corinne, had cleaned houses in neighborhoods exactly like Providence Ridge for 31 years, riding 2 buses each way, coming home with hands cracked from bleach and a quiet, stubborn pride she never once let harden into bitterness. Corinne had died 4 years before Simone signed the papers on Ridgemont Manor, and Simone still kept, in a drawer in her office upstairs, the single torn magazine page her mother had once taped to their refrigerator. A photograph of a stone Georgian house with a brass lion knocker on the door, clipped from a real estate supplement in 1998, beneath which Corinne had written in ballpoint pen, "Someday, baby girl." Simone had bought this exact style of house in this exact county on purpose. It was not vanity. It was a promise kept to a woman who never got to see it. She did not explain any of this to strangers. She had learned, across 17 years of rooms that were not built for her, that justifying yourself to people who had already decided who you were rarely changed their minds. It only gave them a transcript to argue with afterward. So when a Meridian County cruiser rolled to a stop at the edge of her mailbox that afternoon, Simone did not reach for her identity like a shield. She simply stood there, an envelope in her hand, thinking about encryption keys, thinking about her daughter's math homework, thinking about nothing at all that had to do with the man now stepping out of his car with his hand already resting on his holster. She heard the gravel first. A cruiser from the Meridian County Sheriff's Office rolled to the edge of her property and did not pass. It stopped. The door opened, and out stepped Deputy Wade Calloway, 34 years old, 6'2", his uniform pressed into blades, his aviators catching the sun so that his eyes were never visible to anyone he spoke to. He had patrolled Providence Ridge for 5 years and had built a small private reputation among certain residents as a man who kept things clean. Homeowners Association newsletters had quoted him twice, praising his vigilance. Nobody had ever asked him what, precisely, he was being vigilant about, or against whom that vigilance was so consistently aimed. He did not walk toward the gate. He swaggered toward it, thumbs hooked into a duty belt beside a taser, a radio, and a pair of handcuffs that caught the light with a small, ugly glint. Calloway believed, with the total and unexamined confidence of a man who has never once been forced to defend the belief out loud, that he was the last honest line between Providence Ridge and chaos. He did not think of himself as cruel. He thought of himself as thorough. 3 months earlier, at a precinct barbecue, he had told a rookie that the secret to good patrol work in a neighborhood like this one was simple. You learn who looks right, and you ask questions of everyone who doesn't. Nobody at that barbecue had corrected him. That, more than anything else, was the failure that would eventually cost an entire county its independent police authority. Ma'am. Step away from that mailbox box. Simone did not turn immediately. She finished sliding the envelope from the box, tucked it under her arm, and only then looked over. Excuse me? You heard me. This isn't your stop. Whoever you're running errands for, they're not home right now, so you need to come out here and talk to me. There it was. 3 sentences in, and already a verdict had been rendered. Simone had spent 2 decades in boardrooms filled with men who assumed she was someone's assistant before they assumed she was the one who'd built the company they were sitting in. This was different. This had a weapon attached to it. I live here, deputy, she said, her voice level, the kind of level that comes from years of practice rather than the absence of feeling. I'm getting my mail. Calloway laughed, short and humorless, and looked her up and down with the particular slowness of a man cataloging evidence for a story he had already decided to tell. Right, and I'm the governor of North Carolina. He did not know, in that moment, how close to accurate that joke actually was. Pay attention to the envelope tucked under Simone's arm. It will matter again before this is over. I don't have time for this, Simone said, and turned to walk back up the 200 feet of cobblestone toward her front door. Past the boxwoods, her landscaper trimmed every second Tuesday, toward a lion-shaped brass knocker that had been polished so many times its mane had gone soft at the edges. I did not say you could walk away from me. The words cracked across the quiet street loud enough that, 3 houses down, a woman named Marjorie Fenwick paused mid-stride on the sidewalk, a golden retriever's leash looped twice around her wrist. Marjorie had lived on Ridgemont Lane for 11 years. She recognized authority when she heard it misused. She had heard it misused before, on other streets, about other people, and had told herself each time that it was not her business. This time, she did not walk on. She raised her phone and began recording, though she did not yet understand what she was documenting. Simone turned back around. Her spine was straight. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than before. A controlled quiet, the kind she used when a hostile foreign buyer tried to lowball a 9-figure acquisition and thought volume was the same thing as leverage. Deputy, I am going to say this once. This is my property. I am the homeowner. I do not need to explain myself to you on my own driveway. Then show me some ID. My identification is inside my house. Then you're not going anywhere until I see it. Because right now what I've got is an unidentified individual on a $10 million property that doesn't match anybody on file for this address. And last week, the HOA sent out a bulletin about a casing crew working these exact kinds of homes. Calloway's hand drifted from his belt to the gate latch. So I need you to come out here, right now. Here was the first frozen moment. The dog stopped barking. The wind, for a few seconds, did not move the leaves on the crepe myrtle at the edge of the lawn. Marjorie's phone hovered, unmoving, aimed dead center at the gate. And on the other side of the wrought iron, Simone Whitfield stood very still. The way she calculated everything. The way she had at once calculated whether to walk into a room of 30 men who did not want her there and take the seat at the head of the table anyway. Then Calloway reached over the low iron gate, flipped the interior latch, and stepped onto the property. He was now, by any legal definition of the word, trespassing on the estate of a woman worth more than the entire annual budget of his department. He did not know that yet. He would know it in less than 11 minutes, and by then it would already be far too late to matter. "You do not have permission to be on this property," Simone said, not raising her voice, not stepping back, though something in her chest had begun to beat harder against her ribs. "I am asking you to leave. I gave you a lawful order." Calloway closed the distance to 4 feet, close enough that she could smell his cologne, cheap and sharp, close enough that his shadow fell fully across her. His hand rested on the taser now, thumb hooked under the strap. "You are being detained pending identification." "On what grounds?" "Grounds is whatever I say it is. Out here, sweetheart." Something in Marjorie Fenwick's stomach turned over at the word. She had heard men talk like that before, in another decade, about another woman on another sidewalk, and she had said nothing then either. She kept filming. It was, she would tell herself later, the only thing she knew how to do with her hands that felt like doing something. A delivery driver named Desmond Ruiz, 31, 3 months into this route, slowed his van at the mouth of the cul-de-sac and saw the deputy's stance, saw the woman standing her ground, and felt his own heart lurch with a specific and private fear. He had 2 convictions from his 20s that a single wrong word to a cop could resurrect in an instant, and a route manager who was already looking for a reason to write him up. He idled there for 4 full seconds, engine running, hands sweating on the wheel, and then he drove on. He would think about those 4 seconds for a long time afterward. Calloway keyed his shoulder radio without breaking eye contact with her, his voice suddenly performing for an audience that wasn't there yet. "Dispatch, Unit 14, requesting backup at 1401 Ridgemont Lane. Possible burglary suspect, uncooperative, refusing to identify." The lie left his mouth so smoothly that Simone understood, in that instant, that this was not the first time he had told a version of it. "There is no burglary," Simone said. "You are inventing a crime in real time, on my property, in front of a witness." "I'm documenting a suspicious encounter." Calloway snapped back, and something in his voice had begun to fray at the edges, the particular fraying of a man who senses, somewhere beneath his own certainty, that the ground has begun to tilt. "You want to make this easy on yourself, you'll cooperate." Behind the front door, 30 feet away, Maya Whitfield had wandered from the kitchen island toward the front hallway, drawn by the raised voices outside, her small hand already reaching for the deadbolt out of 9-year-old curiosity rather than fear. It was Governor Ellery, glancing past the window at exactly that moment, who quietly told the household assistant standing near the stairs to keep her in the kitchen. Simone never saw her daughter's hand on that door. She would learn about it only later, and it would be the detail that kept her awake longer than any other part of that afternoon. "Last chance," Calloway said, and the cuffs came off his belt with a small metallic snap that seemed, to Simone, louder than anything else that had happened all afternoon. "Turn around. Hands behind your back. I have not committed a crime. You're resisting a lawful detainment. Turn around." She did not move. And in the space of that refusal, 3 seconds, maybe 4, Calloway's face changed. It was not the face of a man enforcing a law. It was the face of a man whose authority had been questioned in front of a witness with a phone, and who could not, under any circumstances, allow that question to stand unanswered. Marjorie Fenwick, still filming, took one involuntary step off the sidewalk and onto the grass verge of Ridgemont Lane, close enough now that her voice carried across the yard. "Officer, she told you this is her house. Why don't you just call it in before this goes any further?" Calloway did not so much as turn his head toward her. "Ma'am, step back onto public property, or I'll cite you for obstruction too." Marjorie stopped where she stood, her heart hammering, torn between the 11 years of quiet, neighborly silence she had practiced on this street and the sudden, sick certainty that silence was no longer a neutral choice. She stayed. She kept the phone raised. It was the only ground she was willing to give up. He grabbed her wrist. Not gently. Hard enough that the envelope slipped from under her arm and hit the cobblestones. Hard enough that her shoulder wrenched sideways. Hard enough that a thin white line would still be visible on her skin 2 days later. Simone did not scream. She did not struggle either. She had learned, somewhere in the hard arithmetic of surviving rooms that were not built for her, that a struggling body gives a man with a badge every justification he is looking for. She stood as still as stone while he forced her arm behind her back, and the only sound she made was a single, sharp intake of breath through her nose. Marjorie Fenwick's hand, still holding the phone, began to shake so badly the footage would later blur for 6 full seconds. That would have been the worst moment of the entire afternoon. If the front door of Ridgemont Manor had not, at that exact instant, swung open, Deputy Calloway, a voice, calm and cold enough to stop a room, came from the top of the front steps. "Let go of her arm right now." Governor Marcus Ellery of North Carolina stood in the doorway of Simone Whitfield's home in his shirt sleeves, having watched the final 90 seconds of the encounter through the leaded glass of her front window while reviewing contract language at her dining table. He had known Simone for 2 years, ever since Vantage Shield had uncovered a foreign intrusion into the state's water treatment control systems 11 days before it could have done real damage. He had not expected, on a Thursday afternoon, to watch a deputy sheriff twist her arm behind her back on her own driveway. Calloway's grip did not loosen immediately. For 1.5 seconds, long enough that everyone present would remember it, he seemed to be deciding whether the man on the steps mattered more than his own pride. Then his hand fell away.
"Sir, I don't know who you are, but this woman was. I know exactly who she is,"
Governor Ellery said, walking down the steps at a pace that was not a stride, but was somehow more frightening for its evenness. "The question is whether you do." Notice now that Simone had not once raised her voice, had not once reached for her phone, had not once said the words, "I am the CEO." Her power in this story was never going to come from her own mouth. It was going to come from everyone else in the frame finally being forced to see what had been standing in front of them the entire time. "Deputy," the governor continued, stopping 4 feet from him, "you are currently trespassing on private property, having entered without a warrant, without consent, and without probable cause beyond the color of the person standing in front of you. You have used physical force against a homeowner engaged in no criminal activity, in front of at least one witness with a recording device. Do you understand the position you are in?" Calloway's jaw tightened, even now, even with the sheriff's own history, whispering at the back of his mind that de-escalation existed for a reason. His pride would not let him bend. "Sir, respectfully, I responded to a legitimate concern about an unidentified person on a high-value property. I don't know who this woman is or who you are, and until I do, I'm well within my rights to." "Her name," the governor said, "is Simone Whitfield. She owns this house. She founded and runs Vantage Shield Cyber Defense. And 40 minutes ago, in her dining room, she and I finalized the terms of a $214 million contract that will secure the digital infrastructure of every county sheriff's office in this state, including, Deputy Calloway, yours." The second frozen moment of the afternoon arrived exactly there. No one moved. Marjorie Fenwick's dog sat down on the sidewalk of its own accord, as though it, too, sensed that something had shifted permanently in the air. Calloway's mouth opened, and for 2 full seconds, nothing came out of it at all. "That's not possible," he finally said, and even as the words left him, something in his own voice had gone thin. "She's dressed like Like a woman who was doing yard work and checking her own mail, Governor Ellery said. Which is what she was doing. Deputy, radio your dispatch. Ask them to run this address. Ask them who owns 1401 Ridgemont Lane. I will wait. Calloway did not move for a long moment. Then, stiffly, his hand trembling in a way his training had never prepared him for, he keyed his radio. The dispatcher's voice came back, thin and static-flecked, but perfectly audible to everyone standing in that driveway. Copy. 1401 Ridgemont Lane, registered owner Whitfield Holdings, LLC. Purchase recorded 4 years ago. No incident history on file. Is there a problem? Unit 14?
No.
Calloway said, and for the first time all afternoon his voice had lost its edge entirely. No problem. But there was a problem, and it was about to get considerably larger, because at that exact moment a second vehicle turned onto Ridgemont Lane. An unmarked county SUV, Captain Russell Doyle's own car, summoned 20 minutes earlier by an assistant inside the house, the instant the confrontation at the gate had begun escalate. Captain Doyle, 51 years old, 26 years on the force, stepped out already sweating through his collar, because his assistant had told him only that a deputy was involved in an altercation with a resident at the address of a state contract, signing the governor himself was attending. He had not been told the resident was black. He had not been told his own deputy had put hands on her. He found out both facts in the same 6 seconds, standing on the cobblestones, looking at the thin red line already rising on Simone Whitfield's wrist. Governor, Doyle managed.
Sir, what happened here? Ask your deputy,
Ellery said. Then ask yourself why this is the 4th complaint of its kind out of Providence Ridge in 14 months, and why none of the first 3 ever reached my desk. Doyle's face went the color of old paper. 4th? I would know, Simone said quietly, speaking for the first time in nearly 2 minutes, because my firm has spent the last 5 weeks conducting a confidential cybersecurity and data integrity audit of the Meridian County Sheriff's Office, under a contract your own procurement office signed in March. We were brought in to review encrypted dispatch logs, patrol GPS data, and use-of-force reporting as part of a statewide modernization initiative. She let that settle, the way she let every hard truth settle before she delivered the next one. I did not expect to become a data point in my own audit, Captain, but here we are. Something in Doyle's expression cracked open, the look of a man watching a wall he had built his entire career on developing a fault line in real time. Ma'am, I had no idea it was you. That, Simone said, is precisely the problem your audit exists to solve. It was never designed to find out whether your officers recognize a CEO on site, Captain. It was designed to find out what they do to the people they assume have no one behind them at all. No governor in the living room, no 7-figure legal retainer, no company big enough to make headlines. Otis Farrow didn't have that. Neither did the college student your officers stopped outside her own front door at 11 at night last spring. I have both of their names in a report, sitting on your desk right now, filed 3 weeks ago, that your office has not yet responded to. Doyle's mouth opened and shut once, wordless. Behind him, Calloway shifted his weight, and, for a moment, something almost like an appeal crossed his face. Not an apology, but the beginning of one, a half-formed sentence that never quite reached his lips before his own stubbornness swallowed it back down. She reached down and picked up the fallen envelope from the cobblestones, brushed the gravel dust from its corner, and held it against her chest for a moment before continuing, her voice now dropping into the register she used only in the final minutes of the hardest negotiations of her career, flat, unhurried, and entirely without mercy. Over the past 5 weeks, Vantage Shield's analytics team mapped every patrol route, every stop, every detainment, and every use-of-force report filed by this precinct against statewide averages. In Providence Ridge alone, residents identified as Black or Hispanic accounted for 71% of unsolicited stops, compared to a countywide average of 13%. Non-felony use of force incidents in this precinct ran 4 times the state median. Of 412 suspicious person detentions logged in the past 18 months, 361 involved a person of color, and those detentions led to an arrest with an actual charge in exactly 9 cases, 2%. Marjorie Fenwick lowered her phone, her hand still shaking, her mouth pressed into a thin, ashamed line. She would post that footage before nightfall, and in the caption she would write 11 words that would follow her for the rest of the year. "I filmed it. I should have said something sooner." "Captain," Governor Ellery said, and his voice, for the first time, carried the full weight of the office he held. "As of this moment, Deputy Wade Calloway is suspended without pay, pending a full criminal investigation into unlawful trespass, assault, and civil rights violations. You will surrender his badge and sidearm on this driveway, right now, in front of me." "Sir," Calloway said, "and here." Even here, with the red mark on Simone's wrist still visible, with the governor of the state standing 18 inches from his face, his jaw set in something that was not quite regret. "Sir, with respect, I was following standard procedure for an unidentified individual on a flagged property. I don't think it's fair to characterize this as—" "Don't," Doyle said, cutting him off, his voice hollow. "Don't you dare finish that sentence, Wade. Not here, not to her." It was the small mercy of the story, if there was one at all in that moment, that it was not the governor, not Simone, but Calloway's own captain, a man who had spent 2 decades building the very system now collapsing beneath him, who finally told him to stop talking. Calloway's hands shook as he unclipped his holster. He held the weapon out, then the badge, and for 1.5 seconds simply stared at the small gold shield in his own palm, as though he did not recognize it. Something moved behind his face that had not been there 10 minutes earlier. Not an apology. Not yet, but the first crack of a man beginning to understand that the version of himself he had built his entire identity around was never coming back. He did not say sorry. He would not that day. But as Doyle led him toward the SUV, Calloway looked back once at the brass lion knocker on the front door of Ridgemont Manor, and something in his throat worked silently twice before he climbed into the back seat without another word. In the 72 hours that followed, the footage Marjorie Fenwick posted that evening reached 4 million views before the local news picked it up, and the caption she wrote beneath it, "I filmed it. I should have said something sooner," became, unintentionally, the headline of a dozen articles about bystander silence in wealthy neighborhoods across the state. Desmond Ruiz watched the video twice from the cab of his delivery van, parked outside a warehouse at the end of his shift, and said nothing to anyone about the 4 seconds he had idled at the mouth of that cul-de-sac. He did not need to. The footage, and his own conscience, were company enough. 6 months later, the story had rearranged itself into something almost unrecognizable from that Thursday afternoon. The Meridian County Sheriff's Office operated under full state oversight, its dispatch and patrol routing systems administered directly by Vantage Shield, under the very contract Simone had been finalizing when the cruiser first pulled onto her street. Internal audits released to the public that autumn confirmed what Simone's numbers had already shown. In the 18 months before her own encounter, 3 other residents of color in Providence Ridge and its surrounding precincts had been stopped, questioned, or detained without any charge ever being filed. A retired schoolteacher named Otis Farrow, 68, stopped twice in his own driveway for matching a description. A college sophomore named Priya Nanda Kumar questioned outside her family's home at 11 at night while retrieving a package, and a man named Marcus Devereaux held for 40 minutes at a gas station 2 miles from Ridgemont Lane on a report that turned out to describe a vehicle 3 shades darker than his own. All three received formal apologies from the county that November, and settlements none of them had believed until that year they would ever actually see. Captain Russell Doyle resigned his command rather than face the full outcome of the state inquiry, and took, of all things, a job teaching a de-escalation seminar 2 counties over. The first time in his career, he told a reporter who tracked him down that he had ever really listened to what he was teaching other people to do. Wade Calloway pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of unlawful trespass and misdemeanor assault, surrendered his certification permanently, and by spring was stocking shelves overnight at a hardware store 40 minutes from Providence Ridge. A former colleague mentioned once, in passing, that Calloway kept a single newspaper clipping about the case folded inside his wallet. Not to defend himself with, as far as anyone could tell, but simply because some part of him could no longer make himself throw it away. Marjorie Fenwick came by Ridgemont Manor, once, unannounced, on a Sunday afternoon nearly 2 months after it all happened. She stood at the same wrought iron gate she had once watched a deputy climb over, her retriever sitting patiently at her feet, and she did not ask to come inside. She only said, "I'm sorry it took me that long to say something," and Simone, standing on her own steps, said nothing for a moment, not out of coldness, but because there was nothing owed in that exchange that a sentence could actually settle. Then she nodded, once, and said, "You said something when it counted most. That's more than a lot of people manage." Marjorie left without another word, and the 2 women never became close, but they nodded to each other on the street. After that, the particular nod of people who have stood on opposite sides of the same hard morning and come out the other end still able to look at one another. On the 6-month anniversary of that Thursday, Simone Whitfield stood at her own front door in the early evening, her hand resting for a moment on the smooth, worn mane of the brass lion knocker. Her mother had once cut out of a magazine and taped to a refrigerator door. Behind her, in the front hallway, 9-year-old Maya sat cross-legged on the floor with a tablet, utterly unaware that the knocker under her mother's palm had witnessed anything at all. "Mom," Maya called out without looking up. "The Wi-Fi's doing the thing again." "I know, baby," Simone said, and for the first time in a long time, her voice had nothing guarded left in it. "I'm fixing it. I'm fixing a lot of things. If this story stayed with you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, maybe even a version of yourself standing on a sidewalk with your phone in your hand, like it so it reaches someone who needs to hear that they are not invisible. Share it with someone who has ever been told, without a single word, that they did not belong somewhere they had every right to be. And tell me in the comments, in that driveway, which person were you? The one who stayed silent, the one who finally spoke, or the one still deciding? I read every answer.